What's going on, Shield Brothers and Shield Maidens? This is True for Shield's Rest, and today I want to talk about Daggerheart magic items and how you can create them on your own. So let's get into it. Alright, y'all, so today we're talking about wondrous magic items. We're not talking about weapons or armor today, we're just talking about the wondrous magic items. We'll get into weapons and armor in a different video, but the reason why I want to focus on the wondrous magic items is because there's so many interesting varying types of wondrous magic items within Daggerheart. Now, there's only a list of 60, but that's not what I care about. Although we're lacking in content, I'm not worried about the content. I like the system. So that's why I want to focus more in on Daggerheart right now, is because I like the system more so than the amount of content there actually is. So with that, there's only 60, like I said, in this list for wondrous magic items. And I'm also not talking about the consumables. I know there's a whole list for potions, which is a whole nother video because that is also interesting. But the reason why I want to start with this is because it's an area that you most likely think of when it comes to just what inhabits your particular world, especially when it comes to if it's a high magic sort of world. So that's something that you need to kind of understand and know how to create for yourself, so that way the lack of content isn't going to hinder you. And with these few little tips and tricks, it should help you along in this area and hopefully make this semi-daunting task, just semi-daunting task, seem a lot less daunting, okay? Because it's really not too bad once you understand what your options are. So first I want to start off with okay, what are the rules for magic items? And the great part is, right now in 1.5, there are no rules for magic items. There's nothing hindering you from giving your players all the magic items in the world. And there's also nothing to tell you how to go about it. There's nothing for crafting or anything in this particular manuscript at the moment. Obviously, we're waiting for the official rules to come out on the 20th of May. So that is what we want to get into when that actually comes in. So for now, though, doesn't mean you can't start making these things yourself. And you may think, well, that's fruitless because we're getting the official rules. Not that much is going to be changing. I'm willing to bet not that much is going to be changing to where you're going to have to overhaul everything that you could possibly be working on right now. Okay? So with that being said, in my games, I typically have my players go up to their proficiency in magic items. So whatever their proficiency is, if it's a +2, +3, whatever, that is going to be what I use to say how many magic items they can be attuned to. Not really attuned, but more of like their essence is tied to it in some way, shape, or form. I'm taking a very DC 20 approach to this, okay? Main reason is because I feel like there should be a semi-limit on the amount of magic items that a player can have when it comes to the amount of ways their essence can be used up. But there's a lot of ways that you can go about it. This is the main way that I'm trying out because I kind of like this idea right now, but I think there's a lot of ways that I'm also kind of flirting with that I want to eventually try out, but there's no way that's completely right and no way that's completely wrong either. It's whatever works for your table and for you as the GM, okay? So with that, I go with the proficiency, but there's another way, which is going off of, much like DC 20 with the prime modifier. In this particular case for Daggerheart, it'd be whatever their main stat is that's the highest. So they're probably only getting to a +5, maybe a +6 at most with the amount of magic items that they can be tied to, okay? Now you could go with their highest mental modifier, and that would be something like their whether that's knowledge, instinct, or presence, because bards obviously are going to go for the presence side of things, with wizards going for the knowledge side. So you get the idea, and then obviously druids being instinct. So you most likely have that, but that also means that they're going to be the ones with the most capability of using magic items by comparison to your warriors, your rogues, stuff like that, okay? So that is kind of what you want to be looking at. You can go either way. It doesn't really matter in the end. It's just, again, what's up to you and what makes sense. All right, so one thing I don't do that DC 20 does do is talk about the slots for the characters in terms of where items can go, right? Those item slots are not necessary, I don't think anyways, at least not for Daggerheart. I don't feel like you're getting anything from having these slots, but to talk about it very briefly in case this is something tantalizing to you in some way, shape, or form, that's going to be like your head slot where there can be a circlet or a helmet. You have your shoulder slot, which can be like paladrones or even like a cape of some kind, or you can just give them both, whatever. You can do necklace as well in that area. You can also do, obviously, the body slot for like the armor or the clothing or something to that effect. Then you got 2 ring slots, a belt slot, and boots. And then obviously your weapons and or shield. You can go that route if you want to. I don't think there's a whole lot of reason to do so, at least not within Daggerheart, because again, the entire goal is to keep this rules light. And so we're trying to add the scaffolding without trying to build anything for you here. That's the entire point, I think, anyways, to what kind of videos we do here on the channel, at least for the Daggerheart side of the house, is I want to give you something that you can build the scaffolding with, but not get any of that filler, so that way it allows you to do so. So you can impose your will upon the game itself, okay? So, in keeping with that theme, I want to show you how you can build your own magic items. Like I said, this is going to be your wondrous magical items, and that's kind of what we want to stick with, right? So I want to start off with what items there are. I'm not going through the whole list, but I'm going to pick out some standouts in terms of showing you the principles that we're going to be looking at, and then I'm going to go through what I do, okay? So to start off with, and this one's not even a magic item, funny enough, but it's the humble premium bedroll, okay? Now the bedroll allows you to essentially clear 1 stress automatically during any downtime. The idea is basically that the player is using it in some way, shape, or form to rest up. If it's a short rest, they're probably sitting on it, kicking back, relaxing, or even laying down on it. Either way works. They could use it as a cushion, or they could use it as the actual bedroll itself. But what I like about this is that it automatically clears 1 stress. To me, that's stackable, And to me, that also gives you permission as the GM to levy stress upon your players. This is a lesson I've learned from Genesis. You levy stress upon your players for weather effects, for even some magical effects that are out there. Not just spells, but just environmental magical effects even, depending on, obviously, context and situation. You can do this through the dice as well. There's a lot of ways to go about this, but this just further gives you that permission to go ahead and use stress a little bit more often. So if they're hiking and doing extraneous work for, let's say, an hour, 1 stress, why not? If they're traveling for the day and they're walking the entire way, levy that stress upon them. That is okay to do, and especially if they've got a lot on them, make that a stress every single hour that they're walking, which forces them to then take a short rest. Like that short rest becomes needed at that point, okay? These mechanics are here for a reason. You might as well utilize them to some degree and really force the players to make those decisions for themselves. Do they want to spend the time clearing some of that stress? How are they wanting to use that downtime a little bit more interestingly? And one way you can do that is through creating potions, funny enough. I said I wouldn't talk about the potions thing, and I'm not getting into the list. But there's 2 off of this wondrous item list that I like, and that's the recipe, okay? This is if they're going to create the potion themselves. And that is the minor health and the minor stamina potion. Okay, and it's these recipes here that I like because it basically states spend 1 downtime action and a handful of gold to create the potion. 1 downtime action and 1 handful of gold. Or I particularly use 20 of whatever currency is the main currency. So in told if I have copper, silver, and gold, but I primarily use silver as the main currency that's used, the main coinage that's used. So that's going to be used in most transactions. Copper primarily, but silver is kind of that happy medium of the road, and that's kind of the idea that I think of when I think of the handful of gold pieces. And now you can use that if gold is your main thing. Whatever, doesn't matter. Obviously, context is incredibly important, and that's obviously for you to decide. But I like that. I like that it has use a downtime action. Handful of gold. You got your potion. Let's move on. I think that's great. Now, the fire jar is going to be the actual first magical item that we are going to look at on this list, and that is because it regenerates on a long rest. On that next long rest, to be more particular, it regenerates, and I like that. We're starting to build this kind of time frame, short rest, long rest, downtime actions, that kind of thing. Stress, health points, all of that, right? You're starting to see how this is going to build our list for what we can use, mechanically speaking, to create these magic items, okay? Now, none of these are going to count against the player total so far. Okay? Fire jar doesn't count. It's a magic item in and of itself that requires no input from the player. Okay? Same goes for obviously the minor health potion and the minor stamina potion. Require no input from the player except to create, right? There's no tie, no essence in there. Same goes for obviously the bedroll, because the bedroll's a bedroll. But when you start getting into, say, the Glamour Stone or even the Lore Keeper, those are two items that I would say would count against that player total. Now, the Glamour Stone, because it requires hope, the player to utilize hope to recreate that particular look that they love so much. I think that would require it, especially if you're going to be channeling hope like that. I look at it as almost like you're channeling it to some degree, like you're almost utilizing that, I don't know, good energy that you've got going on. Well, you know, think of it in whatever you want. But Lore Keeper, though, is another one because it requires you to basically pour these three names, this vitriol from your own essence, into the Lore Keeper for these three names of these creatures that you now will then get a +1 to any action rolls against them. To me, that requires it at that point, okay? Also, one thing I do like is the Arcane Cloak. Reason being is because this is building another principle here, where you can use, if basically the spellcast ability, if your players have a spellcast ability, they can change the texture and the color and the length of that cloak. I think that's a great idea. Give more power to your magic users when it comes to magic items. I love that idea. And you can do so within the magic items that you create. And that's a perfect example, okay? Another one I like, that's not really a magic item, but it's more of that wondrous item, is going to be the skeleton key. And that's because it gives your player advantage, that is, using a finesse roll to try and pick a lock. Just gives them advantage. I think that's great. To give advantage to specific ability checks for a specific task, I think is very interesting. It's almost like experiences in terms of how you can use it for specific things or semi-vague things, but it gives you that advantage in this particular case. And I think that's a great way to really give your players something that's not game-breaking, you know? But it aids in their ability to then have a good narrative play. And I think that's what I like most about these kind of items, is that it's really enhancing that narrative side, especially the Lore Keeper. I mean, you've basically got your Vendetta book here, your Book of Grudges right here, but they just call it a Lore Keeper. So, you know, so there's that. Now, the next one I want to talk about is the Calming Pendant. This is another one that is going to count against that character total for magic items, right? And it's because there needs to be some form of an essence tied to this thing, because if a player basically is about to mark their last stress slot, they can roll a d6, and on a 5+, they don't have to mark it. To me, that's got a little bit tied in there somewhere, you know what I mean? So a lot of this is going to require your particular judgment on what does or does not count against that overall magic total, which is another reason why you can just go with not having a total at all. Just be done with the whole thing, you know what I mean? So you can do that. That's no problem. Same goes for like the Ring of Resistance. That's another one that will count against the total, and if you're going to use the slot, it'll take up that slot, right? Take up one of the ring slots. And this is primarily used for an action. One particular action against that player, they can take resistance, so that way they have the damage of whatever's coming in. That's a choice that they can do once per long rest. So right there, we're building up, again, that same kind of principle idea of once per long rest, and they can do so for resistance, having the incoming damage. I like that. I like that a lot, because now we're building out that list. And so, to not go through any more of the items here, not to bore you any further, I want to finally get into what it is that I use and how I build my items. Now, right, so magic item creation. Where do you start? What do you do? How do you go about it, right? Obviously, you want to start with an idea. Got to start with an idea, but sometimes you just don't really know, right? Like sometimes you do have an item in mind and you're like, I want to create that really quick. It's not that hard to do. You can kind of get a feel for it when you understand the mechanics of the game. You can kind of get a feel for how you're going to create that item in particular. However, there are times when I have no clue what it is that I want to create. And sometimes it just sort of happens, you know? Way you do that, though, is having a chart. I have a chart off to the side that I keep on my wall, so that way I can just quick reference, look to the side, and go, bam, okay, great, that's what I want to use. Because I can see what it is that I need to do depending upon the party's tier. So if they're tier 2, I know that I need to look at the tier 2 side of that chart, and then that's how I can build that item really quick. Now that's if I want to give a player something in particular because they've been doing such great role play, or I just feel like they need a little something else going on in there for their character to really mean something. I don't know. It happens, okay? But more to the point, sometimes I want an adversary to become more dynamic because the party's just been kicking too much ass. You know what I mean? Like they've just been bringing in a whole gaggle of ass, and I just want them to get, their world rocked a little bit without having to bring in more adversaries. And so the way to do that is sometimes through items. You have to track that a little bit, obviously, especially during combat, but I'm willing to do that. I've run D&D combat. I feel like I can manage a lot here, okay? So starting out with, you have your tier 1 side of the house. If weapons and armor are going to be in a tier list, I'm going to make my magic items in a tier list, okay? So tier 1. I typically associate 2 costs with that item in some way, shape, or form. Could be that it's a one-time use, could be that it can be reused on a long rest, or that once per long rest situation, right? Or that it uses hope in some way, shape, or form, where the player has to kind of sacrifice 1 hope, 2 hope, whatever. Depends on what the effect is, obviously. Or they can utilize stress. So it depends on what kind of item I am creating, depends on what kind of costs are going to be associated, but I try to throw in at least 2 costs for a tier 1 item. So that way it's not being used all the time, but at the same time, it gives them something. Makes it a little more interesting, especially when they choose to use it, okay? So that's why I like the 2 cost side, especially for the early tier here. And then there's 1 benefit of some kind. And so to kind of quickly list off the different benefits that you can give a party, right, that you can create into an item without looking specifically for a particular effect. You're just like a quick reference situation. So you can have resistance, immunity, you can do an ability score increase. I wouldn't do that for like a tier 1 necessarily, but maybe for a particular moment where it can be used once, where they gain just 1 extra bit of strength, and then getting into advantage or imposing disadvantage. That's always fun. Hidden, imposing vulnerability, or restrained. Created a fun little orb of entanglement where an individual can basically throw that in like a Pokeball and just create this large area, and really up until close range is what we have for it, where it can restrain everyone that is in that area or who enters that area. And basically they have to make a reaction roll of 15, and they can add in their strength or whatever, We have a little bit of fun with that, but they can throw that into the middle of a combat and then just restrain everybody. And that's a fun little item that's a one-time use thing, So, just saying. But then you can, of course, have it either recover stress or recover HP without it having to be a potion of any kind. Which, as you can see by the Calming Pendant, that's an easy way to gain, to not have to utilize that stress, that last stress point, right? So that's one of those things that, I look at on a regular basis, like, okay, this is my list, this is what I have. So that list again, mind you, with resistance and immunity, that's going to be physical damage and magical damage, okay? But then you got that resistance, you got that immunity, you've got an ability score increase of some kind, preferably temporary, until they get into that higher tier, to make it more permanent, just saying. Advantage, disadvantage, hidden, vulnerable, restrained, stress, and HP. Okay? So those are the things that I look at when I'm coupling in with the tier side of things. Whatever that benefit is from that list, coupled with those 2 costs for the tier 1. Or 2 costs, but making sure that one of those is going to be a short rest rather than a long rest. Okay? And this could be where you start bringing out, where it's not really going to be 2 costs. Just kind of depends on what you're going for here and how balanced it feels and how intuitive even the item feels. Obviously, this is going to be up to your judgment as a GM, but again, like I said, this is a quick reference guide for me, and then when I look and actually sit down and craft these little magic items that I'm trying to bring over or create, from the world itself, I still use this chart regardless. And then I can make those decisions whether I want to tweak it or make it a little bit better or a little bit less costly, even though it's going to be a tier 2 item. Okay? And still with the 1 benefit, but just a better benefit for that tier 2, obviously. I mean, you're trying to increase the tier here. Same goes for tier 3, except it's one cost with two benefits, where one of those benefits is a little bit lighter than the other. You could do something along those lines. Again, this is just a loose guide here. It's not anything hard and fast you got to do. Tier 4, similar situation, except with Tier 3, you make that one cost probably a long rest or so many times during a long rest, whereas Tier 4 could be that short rest situation, or, again, hope, stress, HP, what have you, okay? And then they get like some solid benefits out of that. Typically 2 benefits, but you can, depending on how strong that initial benefit is, you may not even need a secondary one in there. But it's a quick guide. It's a quick little chart that I use that's just right there, ready to go, and I can keep moving. So I love that. It's just an easy way to go about things. Create something for yourself, and you'll find that you'll tweak this. Like if you use this at all, you'll find that you'll tweak this and you'll make it a little bit better as you go. It took me a little bit to like even get to this point where I even am imposing 2 costs in with a magic item of some kind. So, or that I've stilted it so much that there's really only one real benefit out of it, and it's not even that great. You can almost negate the cost on some of that, kind of like the homing compasses. They just point to each other. That's it. Not a whole lot that you can do with that, except there are some fun narrative moments that can come from that, especially if they try to slip it into the pocket of, you know, whoever it is that they're trying to track. It's an idea. But that's what I like about Daggerheart items in general, is that they give you a lot more to work with than just mechanical benefits. They can even provide a lot of narrative benefit to it. I mean, we see that with the Lorekeeper. That Vendetta book, that Book of Grudges situation is fantastic. I ain't gonna say no to that. You kidding me? But same goes for a lot of these other items on the list that provide some very interesting narrative roleplay, even though a lot of it can be combat-oriented magic items, but they give you so much from a narrative perspective too. So something to think about when you're creating these items and when you're bringing stuff over from other games, and I encourage you to do so, because let's face it, Daggerheart is actually a really good system. It's a very enjoyable system, especially for a rules-light system. When you don't want that nitty-gritty, you don't have to have it in this. That's what's great about Daggerheart. And why not create into a system you enjoy? That's been my philosophy as we've been going through all these different systems, is once you find that system that you really attach to, just start creating for that, regardless of what is popular or what everybody else likes. Okay, I'm just saying. There's no point in that. But once you find that one that you enjoy, just keep going with it. I like Daggerheart because it's the rules like for Genesis, so that's why I stick with it. But really and truly, I think it's a great system that you can do a lot with. And if you stick with us on the channel, you will see what I'm talking about. And we have a lot in the works, and one of the things is going to be creating more magic items from the tabletops that we love, even if we don't love the systems that accompany these items, this amount of content, okay? So look for that in the future. So if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, because we're going to be doing a lot here on the channel, particularly for Daggerheart, particularly for DC-20. I mean, we're getting into Lancer right now. I'm so excited about that. It's going to be so much fun. So love getting into all these different systems and getting exposed to different ways of looking at tabletop gaming. So subscribe, hit the bell notification so you don't miss a single one of those videos. But until the next one, y'all, keep that shield wall strong.